Hello everyone watching at home, you're with Sarvin McClinton from Adelaide Eternal, bringing you another 7-minute 7-point series deck tech. This is the companion video to the Big Tempo shell, so make sure that you watch that primer before checking out these variants. In this video I'll give you a quick overview of the 3 different ways that you can add a third colour to the Big Tempo shell. You can add black to make it Sultai, you can add white to make it Bant, and red for Temur. So let's have a look at the latter first. Now this is a natural evolution of Rug Life, which was a Temur tempo deck. Now you're going bigger, so it's Rug Lord. This third place finish list was from back when you could just randomly free roll Wrenn and Six and Mystic Sanctuary. That is thankfully no longer the case, so you can simply cut Wrenn and Six and Force of Will or Snapcaster Mage, and the deck functions almost exactly the same. Now what does red add? Well, first of all, you get reach, and you also have early game removal in the form of Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt. You actually get both of those rolls in Bone Crusher Giant, which stomps early game, and then late game is a 4/3 that randomly domes your opponent when they try to remove it, so fantastic when you're in the tempo roll. In creature matchups, Clothis, very difficult to beat because your life totals are constantly changing by 4, it's very hard to race. In terms of Planeswalkers, you get 2 Planeswalkers that are fantastic at filtering, so you can make sure that your hand is always relevant. As well, you get the reach in the form of the +2/+0 first strike and trample. When you put this on a Spellseeker or a Coatl, it makes them legitimate threats. And speaking of legitimate threats, another fantastic 2-drop. Remember, the 2-drop is really important for big tempo. Now, of course, there are weaknesses if you choose to sleeve red in lieu of other colors. Your main forms of interaction are cards like Spell Snare and Mana Leak, and these are fundamentally relatively weak and not particularly mana efficient unless you're catching them at exactly the right time with Spell Snare. So you also have difficulty removing things permanently. The only removal you have really is Magmatic Sinkhole, and that's really difficult to kill something like Oko. Now, I recommend not cutting, say, Force of Will. Maybe cut Snapcaster Mage because it ensures that Force of Will is still there for those problematic permanents. Now, the true strength of red is in your sideboard. Whilst it's no longer as important to have Rebs because you've got a plethora of good things against blue in the blue-green shell, the main thing here are the moons. This shores up that weakness to midrange, and it allows you to just simply lock those decks out. Let's have a look at a different variant. So this variant is Hootie and the Bant Fish. So this is the Bant version adding white. Now, what does white add? Well, first of all, you get fantastic removal. You get 3 different forms of exile effects in the form of Swords to Plowshares and Council's Judgment and Skyclave Apparition, which is a new card. This allows you to get rid of things like Oko for the latter 2 and Uro for all 3 of those, which is just fantastic in the current metagame. Now, since you don't have to run things like Magmatic Sinkhole, you actually get another Delve slot. Remember, you can only really run at most 2 Delve or Escape cards before you have to start really committing to them. And Hooting Mandrills provides you another really early threat, which is fantastic, getting around things like True Name Nemesis because it has Trample. Now, the other fantastic threat is obviously Monastery Mentor. You have a higher cantrip count in Sleight of Hand, Opt, and also Serum Visions, which lets you go down to 19 land, but it just makes it so that you have a maximum number of ways to get at least 2 or 3 tokens out of Monastery Mentor. Savin's Reclamation is absolutely insane at making Nightmare Gifts piles and also returning both Oko and Monastery Mentor, which is a complete nightmare for your opponent. Now, the weaknesses of adding white is that obviously Snare and Mana Leak are really your only forms of interaction, but you do get things like Teferi Time Raveler, which do help. Now, the sideboard is another somewhat weakness of white because your white additions are fundamentally quite lackluster. Although our second weakest matchup is Ramp, which means that you actually get Stony Silence and Null Rod and Collector Roof, which are just absolutely fantastic at doing a number on your opposing Ramp decks. This obviously doesn't solve your mid-range matchup, so I would recommend sleeving up Drew Carter's Bourbon and Coke tech and adding something like Entreat the Angels and Jace Vryn's Prodigy to loot it away and return it with, say, Mystic Sanctuary, just to go absolutely over the top of your opponents who are on mid-range. Now this brings us to Sultai. Now black adds a suite of great cards. So first of all, the thing that black adds is interaction. Cheap interaction at that. Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize are just supremely better than casting things like Mana Leak. In addition, we also get a card like Hymn to Turak, which is just fantastic, and it justifies adding both Jace, Vryn's Prodigy and Seagate Stormcaller, both of which operate on sorcery speed interaction rather than instant speed interaction. We also have the strongest 2-drop threats in Dark Confidant and Bitterblossom, and of course remember that the big tempo shell has a life gain sub-theme. That life gain sub-theme makes the drawbacks of these two almost entirely irrelevant. We also get the strongest 2 mana versatile removal spells in Abrupt Decay and Assassin's Trophy, as well as Baleful Strix as a blocker. And we also get Drown in the Loch, which doubles up as versatile interaction spells. Speaking of interaction, we also get Cling to Dust, which is fantastic when paired with, say, Deathrite Shaman, to have a graveyard removal main deck suite that ensures that we don't lose to opposing Uro and other graveyard threats. Not to mention that Deathrite Shaman is fantastic in the late game because it powers out early 3-drops, and 2 has 2 of the greatest 3-drops that you really want to power out in Highlander. Now, one of the strongest additions to Black's plan is its sideboard strategy. The main deck is already better than the others at dealing with midrange because you've just got powerful cards like Leovold and Liliana the Last Hope. But the key to winning post-board against midrange is by taking out your mediocre interaction spells, like Daze, and bringing in threats like Ashiok Nightmare Weaver, which could easily be in the main deck if you have enough space, and also bringing in things like Toxic Deluge and Sylvan Library, and just basically converting yourself into a small mid-range deck. This allows you to go toe-to-toe with those opposing mid-range decks. And look, if your metagame has a lot of ramp decks, which you're also a little bit weak to, just add Null Rod into your sideboard as well. And going back to mid-range, obviously, add something like Damnation. And that'll just give you a fantastic ability to convert over. Now, as much as I love the black option here, I've placed first through third with all of these different variants at multiple events, and so it really just means that the big tempo shell is strong regardless of which color you add. So I just recommend experimenting and seeing which of those third colors you like the most. If you're playing without power as well, I've also added the Painful Truths version to the description links below, which lets you play big tempo without breaking your budget. So have a go, sleeve it up, have fun, and thanks for watching.